Hello everyone. Welcome to the Icewine Knowledge Class. Last episode, we took you into the frozen vineyards on a cold winter night, discovering how winemakers and growers work tirelessly under snow and ice to craft high-quality ice wine. In this episode, we're leaving the chilly vineyard behind and stepping into the warm fermentation room to explore how freshly pressed ice wine juice transforms into the sweet, luxurious wine we love. Part 5. How ice wine is fermented. From -8 degrees Celsius to liquid gold. First, let's talk about the extreme challenges faced by the fermentation yeast. Once those frozen grapes are pressed into sweet, concentrated juice, we enter a very important stage of production: fermentation. This is the crucial step where ice wine begins its transformation from concentrated grape juice into the golden liquid we know and love. Most ice wine juice has a Brix level between 37 and 42. And in some cases, it can reach as high as 55 Brix. That means the sugar concentration in the juice can be as high as 400 grams per liter. Although sugar is the food source for yeast, and we all know that alcohol is created when yeast consumes sugar and produces alcohol and carbon dioxide, this extremely high level of sugar creates an intense stress environment for ordinary yeast cells. It's essentially a sweet hell for them. The reason behind this is that the solutes in ice wine juice are extremely concentrated. Because of osmosis, yeast cells begin to lose water, as water molecules move from inside the yeast cells out into the juice. This causes the cells to shrink, and some of them even start to die. And that's because yeast can only function when there is enough water available. It's just like how grain or wood becomes moldy only when moisture is present. As a result, the entire fermentation process is extremely difficult and slow. To ensure that fermentation proceeds smoothly, winemakers use a large amount of yeast, and for some strains, they perform a process called rehydration. This means the yeast is first soaked in warm water or diluted grape juice to wake them up, like giving them enough water before sending them to the front line. Because of this, the yeast strains used for ice wine are different from those used in regular wine. They must be able to withstand high osmotic pressure to achieve the best fermentation results. Fermentation temperature cannot be too cold or too hot. The ideal range for ice wine yeast is between 13 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius. As yeast consumes sugar to produce alcohol, it also secretes glycerol to protect itself from excessive water loss. The right amount of glycerol makes ice wine feel silky smooth, like velvet gliding across the tongue. This also contributes to the beautiful legs you see on ice wine in a glass. While the high sugar content helps, glycerol plays an important role too. At the same time that glycerol is produced, a byproduct called volatile acid, such as acetic acid, is formed. But this acidity isn't a problem. It actually helps balance the sweetness of the wine, just like adding a touch of lemon to a donut. The fermentation process is extremely slow, taking anywhere from a few weeks to several months, until the alcohol content reaches 7% to 11%. While the residual sugar remains 190 to 220 grams per liter. Sweet, but never cloying. In Canada, ice wine must have an alcohol content of at least 7%, while in the European Union, the minimum requirement is 4.5%. Many people wonder, if ice wine is so high in sugar, doesn't that mean it should also be very high in alcohol? On the contrary, ice wine's alcohol content is actually slightly lower than that of regular wine. This is because excessively high sugar levels can kill the yeast. Historically, before the invention of modern active yeast strains, most ice wines would have had very low alcohol levels, and often carried less than ideal flavors. This is because the natural yeast cells in grapes, Saccharomyces, cannot survive in such high sugar concentrations. Sometimes, ice wine juice can only ferment if it is luckily contaminated. That is, if yeast cells are accidentally introduced from equipment or the residues in oaked barrels, rather than coming from the native yeast on the ice wine grapes themselves. So we can say that the popularity of ice wine is the perfect combination of human ingenuity and nature's gift. Neither can do it alone. Next, let's talk about the acid adjustment in ice wine. The balance between sweetness and freshness. Although ice wine is naturally sweet and intensely flavorful due to its high sugar content, its sense of balance comes from acidity. A certain level of acidity gives ice wine a clean, refreshing finish. Without acidity, ice wine would be nothing more than sugar water. The acidity in ice wine juice mainly comes from malic acid and tartaric acid. Let's start with malic acid, the contributor to ice wine's refreshing character. Its name may remind you of apples, and its flavor really does have that crisp, green apple quality, with a tartness and a hint of youthful fruitiness during ice wine fermentation. Most of the malic acid is retained, accounting for 67% to 93% of the total acidity. Because cold pressing removes much of the water, the concentrated malic acid gives the wine a sharper edge, cutting through the sweetness with a refreshing sensation. It prevents the wine from feeling cloying, almost like taking a crisp bite of a chilled green apple in winter. Next, let's look at tartaric acid, the big brother of ice wine's structure. Its flavor is softer, reminiscent of the natural acidity of ripe grapes, with subtle hints of lemon and white vinegar. Tartaric acid provides the backbone of ice wine, making the body more balanced and giving it an elegant, restrained finish, so it doesn't feel overwhelmingly sweet. In most regular wines, especially reds, tartaric acid usually dominates the acidity. But in ice wine, when grapes freeze, much of the tartaric acid crystallizes and precipitates as tartrate, so its content is lower than malic acid. After analyzing hundreds of grape juice samples from Riesling, Vidal, and Cabernet Franc ice wines, we can draw some general conclusions from this comparison table. Riesling shows the brightest and most refreshing acidity, with the lowest pH level. Vidal ice wine usually has a similar acidity level to Riesling, but its pH value tends to be slightly higher. Cabernet Franc, on the other hand, generally presents lower acidity and a relatively higher pH. Its dominant acid is malic acid and very low tartaric acid level. According to European Union regulations, ice wine, like all premium quality wines, is not allowed to be acidified with tartaric acid. A small amount of citric acid may be added, but the total amount cannot exceed 1 gram per liter. Legally, this is considered a stabilization and antimicrobial treatment, rather than acidification. Because of this rule, ice wines produced in Germany and Austria often end up with lower acidity or a less balanced structure, especially when the pH level is high, which is quite common in varieties that naturally lack acidity, such as Cabernet Franc. For Riesling, acidification usually isn't necessary, except in rare or unusual vintages. In contrast, Canada's VQA system offers much greater flexibility. Here, winemakers are allowed to use a wider range of acids. Beyond citric acid, up to 4 grams per liter of total acidification is permitted. With this option, winemakers can fine-tune acidity and improve the overall balance of the ice wine. It gives Canadian winemakers the freedom to experiment, express their creativity, and work their magic. As a result, Canadian ice wine tends to offer greater stylistic diversity, with beautifully harmonious sweetness and acidity. Next, let's talk about the role of oak barrels in wine production. The transformations that occur during barrel aging are incredibly complex. In many ways, an oak barrel functions like a flavor factory. Most barrels are made from French oak, specifically Quercus robur, or from American white oak, known as Quercus alba. Within the wood, there are natural compounds that can contribute aromas of vanilla, coconut, caramel, and even subtle smoky notes. Different levels of toasting also give the wine very different characteristics. Lightly toasted barrels tend to express more delicate floral notes, while heavily toasted barrels can develop richer, smoky flavors. As the wine rests in the barrel for several months, the oak works like a master seasoning artist, slowly releasing aromatic compounds and tannins, layer by layer. Secondly, oak barrels allow the wine to breathe. The wood contains tiny pores, and through them, a small amount of oxygen can slowly work its way into the wine. During this gradual oxidation process, tannins and other compounds in the wine begin to react under this gentle micro-oxygenated environment created by the wood grain. We call this micro-oxygenation. Over time, this process softens the tannins, transforming the wine from sharp and astringent into something much smoother and silkier. However, when it comes to ice wine production, the use of oak barrels is actually quite limited. Oak aging is mostly applied to Vidal, helping build a richer structure and giving the wine a more distinctive character, one that has become closely associated with Canadian ice wine. Riesling, on the other hand, is a far more delicate and refined variety. Traditionally, it is fermented and aged in stainless steel tanks to preserve its purity, freshness, and elegant natural aromatics. Now, let's explore a very special style of ice wine, sparkling ice wine. Among all wine categories, sparkling wines are undoubtedly the ones that carry the strongest sense of celebration. And when we hear sparkling wine, most people immediately think of champagne from France. Whether it's the moment when the New Year countdown reaches zero, the champagne tower flowing at a wedding, or the joyful toasts at a summer garden party, sparkling wine always brings a feeling of lightness, excitement, and ritual. Sparkling ice wine relies on naturally produced carbon dioxide in the wine to create delicate bubbles. These fine bubbles bring a lively texture and a refreshing sense of layers on the palate. Just like traditional ice wine, sparkling ice wine can be paired with desserts, or enjoyed on its own. It makes an ideal companion for afternoon tea or festive gatherings. And just imagine, what kind of magic happens when these bubbles meet ice wine? 1998 was an exhilarating year for winemakers. The grapes grew in exceptional condition, reaching a perfect balance of ripeness and acidity. As Christmas approached, the cold snap arrived right on schedule. With temperatures dropping between -9 and -12 degrees Celsius, and lasting until mid-January 1999. This created a golden window for producing top-quality ice wine. It was in this very year that Enniskillen in Canada experienced an extraordinary ice wine grape harvest. Against this backdrop, a new experiment quietly began, crafting sparkling ice wine from these premium ice wine grapes. The traditional method for sparkling wines, like champagne, is a two-step fermentation process. First, the grape juice ferments into still wine. Then, yeast and sugar are added to the still wine to generate carbon dioxide bubbles. However, this method doesn't work well for ice wine, which has extremely high sugar levels and an alcohol content already around 9%. To overcome this, the winery turned to a single-step fermentation in a pressurized tank. The key to this method is that the entire fermentation process, from fresh grape juice to sparkling ice wine, is completed in one go. During the fermentation, the tank remains open until the alcohol content reaches about 9 to 9.5%. As fermentation enters its final stage and the alcohol rises to 10.5 to 11%, the tank is then sealed. This allows the carbon dioxide produced by the yeast during the last 1.5% increase in alcohol to be naturally trapped, creating the delicate bubbles. Finally, the wine must be aged for a period of time before it meets the strict standards of a high-quality sparkling ice wine. Therefore, the initial yeast used in sparkling ice wine must be highly active, capable of sustaining fermentation, up to 10.5 or 11% alcohol. This innovative approach eventually received VQA certification and was formally recognized under Canadian wine regulations. Since 1998, Enniskillen has been producing sparkling ice wine continuously, pioneering the creation of bubbles in ice wine. Tasting sparkling ice wine is a truly unique experience. Flavors of tropical fruits, ginger, pear, and lemon lime unfold layer by layer within the fine, persistent bubbles. The finish is silky smooth, leaving a lingering elegance on the palate. This wine can cleverly balance the richness of desserts, such as bittersweet chocolate truffle cake. Thanks to the magic of the bubbles, the aroma becomes more complex, and the texture feels lively and dynamic. On a sun-drenched summer afternoon, imagine French toast soaked in vanilla-infused ice wine, paired with a glass of Vidal sparkling ice wine. It's elegant, light, and almost like a poem awakening the senses. The combination of ice wine and bubbles is not just a technical breakthrough in winemaking. It's a sublime experience for both taste and vision. Now that we've explored the journey of ice wine, from a single frozen grape to a golden liquid, in our next episode, we'll raise our glasses and truly indulge. Not only will we savor the exquisite flavors of ice wine, but we'll also embark on a culinary adventure, discovering how tasting ice wine can provide an unparalleled sensory experience. If you enjoy our program, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.